I would say relax. Don't worry about the debt. Don't worry about the debt until the virus is gone, and actually don't worry about the debt after the virus is gone.
That was Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman telling you, don't worry about the debt. I'm going to show you a chart on screen right now. Does that look like something you should worry about? You know, if you zoom in here, if you just look at the part that's blue, 2016, 17, 18, 19, you know, it used to be that people on the left, the mainstream left as well as the far left, it used to be that people on the left criticized Donald Trump for what you see there with the debt of the United States of America getting worse and worse and worse. And then, oh, look at that. 2020, it's not just a little bit worse, is it? Why do you think it is that the mainstream left, the center left, the moderate left is saying what Paul Krugman is saying? That they're saying, don't worry about the debt. What a preposterous thing to say, whether cynically or sincerely, given that it is Donald Trump who's to blame for this debt. Wouldn't it be reasonable? Wouldn't it be reasonable to worry? I mean, it's not asking a whole lot to worry about the debt. Quote, the U.S. is about to vastly increase its debt, period. That's a good thing, period. What a headline. Quote, the scare stories about government debt are back, period. Ignore them. Wow, it sure seems like there's a chorus of expert opinion quoted in mainstream center-left publications like the New York Times and the Guardian. They're all trying to convince you that what you see on this chart, this big, scary red line, that's nothing to be scared of at all. What do you think possibly could motivate this? Oh, well, countries never go bankrupt, right? No, countries do go bankrupt all the time. There are millions of people suffering terribly all around the world right now because their country, their government went bankrupt because of sovereign debt defaults. In this world, there are no heroes and there are no villains. There are people who care and there are people who don't. The reality is the left wing doesn't have a monopoly on caring. You and I, right now, we get to choose whether we care or we don't, whether we're willing to learn truth from facts, face up to empirical reality, or if we're going to insist on a fiction and disregard the facts for that reason. You ever heard of Argentina? Oh, but Argentina going bankrupt, that was ancient history. That was a real long time ago, right? 2002? 2002 is ancient history to you? You think that doesn't count? You think what happened to Argentina can't happen to Canada? It can. Have you checked the newspaper headlines lately about Argentina? Maybe it didn't make it into your news. Argentina is still dealing with its bankruptcy, with its sovereign debt crisis. It's still dealing with the consequences of what happens when you have the attitude of Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman of just not worrying about your debt for just a little bit too long. They're still dealing with that to this day. Argentina heads for 9th sovereign debt default. These are headlines from 2020. This is news here and now. These are the consequences people are dealing with. And you know what kind of consequences they include? They include people starving to death. They include people dying because hospitals don't have electricity. They include diseases from the dark ages returning because the government can't employ sanitation workers to collect garbage anymore. Our civilization in the 21st century, it's impressive, but it's fragile. If you take away just one of the things, one of the services the government provides that we've all come to rely on day in and day out, you take away garbage collection, you take away electricity, you take away running water or water purification cleaning services, just one of those, and very rapidly, the gleaming towers of our most beautiful cities become uninhabitable hellholes. Plagues from 500 years ago can return. And yes, the convenience of going to grocery stores is amazing. The convenience of buying food grown and manufactured all over the world is incredible. That supply chain is also frighteningly fragile, as is shown right now in Lebanon. Have you seen these headlines? I'm not asking, have you been looking for these headlines? I'm asking if you've seen them. It's most likely they haven't been discussed on the news program you choose to watch or in the newspaper that you happen to have seen. People in Lebanon are starving to death today. This is a sovereign debt crisis unfolding right now in the year 2020. And in case you think it was caused by coronavirus, you're wrong. Quote, millions of people are watching their savings and salaries disappear as food inflation hits nearly 200%. Mohammed stood in the market trying to calculate how much food he could afford for himself, his wife, and 2 children. In the end, he decides on potatoes for dinner. 3 potatoes sliced up with half a red pepper and some cucumbers on the side. That would have to be dinner for 4. Quote, before the dollar crisis, my monthly salary as a freelance accounting assistant would last 15 to 20 days. Now it's only enough for 5 days. I think they will probably make all of us leave our jobs at the end of July. My family are already past the minimum that we can survive on. We borrow from the market to eat for the rest of the month. Now, I'm just going to show you this chart again. And you see how the blue lines were going up, up, up under Donald Trump before we already had a debt crisis, long before this coronavirus thing started happening. Oh, many of you, I'm sure, are not watching from the United States. You say, well, maybe this is just a uniquely American problem. No, it's global. Okay, you can take a look here. The total debt on planet Earth, that's actually the calculus being shown in this chart. Debt was a problem globally and worldwide. But if we just look here at the United States, you look at that gradual increase before coronavirus under Donald Trump. Now look at this chart. This is the gradual increase in Lebanon before their economy collapsed, before their government declared that they just had too much debt, couldn't make the interest payments anymore. You know, it's not that much difference between 2 curves, especially when, oh wow, look at this. See where the red arrow is? That's exactly the same curve, but now we're going back all the way to the year 2000. And that increase in debt looks even more humble, even more reasonable, right? The societies we live in are fragile. If you're on the left, if you're on the right, if you're on the center, no matter what, ask yourself, do you care? Do you care about reality? Do you care about what happened to the people of Lebanon? Do you care about what happened to the people of Argentina? Face up to the reality first and then theorize. Don't tell me that you've got some gleaming economic theory that just requires me to disregard this kind of reality to believe in it. Quote, Lebanon must now choose between honoring its debts and providing the most basic services to its citizens. How can we pay the creditors while there are people in the streets without money to buy a loaf of bread? You think this is a game? You think this is something to score political points on in this little pantomime of Democrat versus Republican, or in Canada, the Liberal Party versus the Conservative Party? It's not a game. This has unspeakably terrible consequences for the future of millions and millions of people. When individuals run up too much credit card debt, they can go bankrupt. When Lebanon, the country, the government, goes bankrupt, do you think the people of Lebanon can run away as refugees to Syria? Think about what happens next as one domino after another begins to fall.
Now, the finance minister went to great lengths to brag about the low interest rates that he's paying on the debt, as though he somehow set those interest rates himself. Those interest rates are temporary, and they're only made possible by the cornucopia of cash that is coming out of the Bank of Canada, a bank which has created through keystrokes on a computer about $400 billion of new currency for government spending in less than 100 days. This government has now smashed through the $1 trillion debt mark. $1.06 trillion is the size of Canada's national debt. A deficit of $343 billion. We expected the finance minister would arrive here today with a plan to bring our economy back to life. Instead, what he did is brag that his plan is the most expensive plan in the G7. He said, because it consumes 10% of GDP, higher than any other G7 country and higher than the G20 average, because it spends the most money, because it is the most costly, it must therefore be the best. But of course, it has simultaneously produced the worst results.
I've shown you this chart before, but I now want to draw your attention to the headline I've got on the right-hand side of the screen. America is on track for a $4 trillion deficit in 2020. Should it matter? You can already guess this article, just like the other headlines I showed you, it's somewhat more smarmy in stating it, but it's telling you it doesn't matter. Don't worry about the debt. Oh, on the contrary, every well-intentioned, high-minded liberal, every left-of-center, sophisticated, urbanite person ought to go around reassuring others that it's just a misconception that government debt is. It's just a misconception that governments can go bankrupt and this can have terrible consequences for people, right? And who is this guy? I looked into him. Who is the author of this article? He describes himself as offering a center-left perspective. He basically writes freelance propaganda for the Progressive Policy Institute. It's no surprise, most of what the Progressive Policy Institute endorses is massive levels of government deficit spending in order to achieve their particular left-of-center social and economic goals, just like Paul Krugman. Stereotypically, the right wing cares about austerity while the left does not. And the mainstream left, like Paul Krugman, they actually deserve the harshest criticism on this. It's people in the center, it's the moderates in the middle that deserve the harshest criticism. But in praxis, conservatives care about tax cuts, not balanced budgets. Keep that in mind. Austerity is meaningless if it's combined with tax cuts, with lower taxes for the wealthy, because the outcome of the government being deeper in debt is still the same.
I would say relax. Don't worry about the debt. Don't worry about the debt until the virus is gone, and actually don't worry about the debt after the virus is gone.
Paul Krugman says, don't worry about the debt. I'm saying to you, worry. You also can end up like Argentina. You also can end up like Lebanon.